How's everybody doing? Good? Thank you to on the Revel for, the support was mutual, right? We supported them, they support us, and that's Cannabis. So if you don't know me, my name's Rob Dipisa. I'm the chair of the Cannabis group at Schotz. Schotz is a full-service law firm. We got offices all the way down the East Coast, as far west as Texas. So before I get started, I'm just gonna give it a little intro on me. So I started practicing in commercial real estate in 2009, and then I launched into the cannabis industry in 2013, mostly into regulatory compliance and application work. So where real estate and cannabis meet is just my sweet spot. That's where I'm comfortable. I'm like a duck in water. So I'm just gonna lay out what we're gonna talk about today. First, I'm gonna just set the stage and talk about New York City real estate in general, because before we really get into cannabis and real estate, you need to know what's happening in and around the city. Then I'm gonna talk a little bit about the deal structure, what I'm seeing on both sides. And then after that, I'm gonna talk about some negotiating points, some strategies that you can use, because you gotta know what's coming at you so that you're ready to react, and that's gonna put you in the best negotiating position that you possibly can be in. And I know we don't have time for questions and answers, but after this, come find me, ask me anything you want. So who here shops online? Raise your hands. I love it. I love it. I'm home, I'm on my computer, I'm sitting on a couch, I hit a button and something shows up at my door the next day. It's amazing. I have kids. I can't go out. So you ever think about, though, what it takes to make that happen from a real estate perspective? That next day or same day delivery requires all of these e-commerce operators to have real estate in and around New York City to accommodate that. So what's been happening in the past, I'd say 10 years, is we've seen an acceleration in large operators, Amazon, Walmart, big e-commerce, scooping up all of the light industrial and warehouse space in and around New York City. And what that's done is it's driven up the price per square foot of that type of real estate in the area. It's important to know that, especially if you're gonna be on the manufacturing or cultivation side of the business. It depends on a lot of things, right? It depends on the size of your operation. We'll get into that a little bit. Anyone here walk down 8th when you were coming? Show of hands. Did you count the empty retail storefronts? So you gotta think about how e-commerce and the pandemic have affected the cannabis industry and the real estate industry in different ways. It depends what kind of asset you're going for. Are you gonna open a dispensary, or are you gonna be on the other side of the business? And this is gonna help dictate where you're gonna end up. So, like I said earlier, warehouse and industrial space in and around New York City, it's gonna be expensive. You gotta think to yourself, well, how big is my operation? Am I big enough where I'm gonna be competing with these e-commerce giants, or am I gonna fall below the radar? Am I gonna be 10,000 square feet or less? Am I gonna be 5,000 square feet? Maybe you're not gonna have the same issues that some of those larger operators are. Now you think, okay, well, I'm opening a dispensary. Well, what do I do? Well, I mean, the pandemic was very good for you, and so was the growth of e-commerce, because there's so much availability. I mean, I remember when I started doing this, and I would call landlords, and they would just hang up the phone. No one wanted to talk to me. Nobody wanted to hear the word cannabis. But now, they're looking for service-oriented businesses, and they're looking for dispensaries to come fill these empty storefronts, because they're not making any money. So if you're on the dispensary side of the business, you're gonna be in a completely different area. You're gonna be in a completely different position when it comes to finding real estate. When it comes to industrial warehouse, you may find yourself, especially if you have a larger operation, in what I like to call the green zone, or the outer ring of the donut, where 45 minutes to an hour north of New York City, we're seeing a pickup in activity in the cannabis space with people scooping up. I mean, at this point, we're very early, right? So it's multi-state operators, it's the larger operators who have the funds to pick up that property now. But you gotta think differently. You gotta be smart with your money. You gotta time it right. It's one of the hardest things that I have to do with clients, and it's when to pull the trigger. So let's talk just a little bit about deal structure. And I know it's a little bit early, but you know, the legislation, the regulations, and the application is going to drive the structure of your deal. chances are you're gonna need real estate. But what position do you need to be in when you apply? Do you need to own it? Do you need an option to own it? What do you need? And how do you make that determination when you don't have any information in front of you? You gotta be flexible. You gotta make sure you have flexibility in these agreements. So let's go into the deal structure a little bit. We'll start with the first one. And the least expensive is the binding letter of intent. And the reason it is because you might not necessarily need a lawyer to put together a binding letter of intent. It's a couple pages, you're putting the bare bones in the agreement, and you're locking up that property. And you want it to be binding, right? If it's non-binding, anyone can walk away, and the owner can tell you to go pound salt. But here's something to think about when you're entering into a binding letter of intent. There's no meat on the bones. You've just put the bones in place, and then you said, here, property owner, wait here. I'm gonna go get my license, I'll be back, and then I'm gonna execute on that LOI, and then we'll negotiate the lease or the purchase and sale agreement. What does that do? Puts you in a pretty bad negotiating position when you come back to the property owner with your license and you're tied to that real estate. They got you. Try getting any other favorable terms in that agreement. They're just gonna say no. What are you gonna say? You need that property. Your license was all about that property. Your plans were all about that property. One way to solve it is, and listen, and I know, every dollar is valuable, but I would recommend that if you're gonna do a binding letter of intent, you negotiate the lease or the purchase and sale agreement ahead of time, lightly, attach it to the back, and have language in so that when you get your license, all you're doing is signing. Because that's the way you're gonna get those terms in there. And I know it's more of an upfront cost, but I'll tell you what, it'll cost you a lot more on the back end if you don't have any meat to the bones and you're starting from just a completely offset negotiating position. Another way this is done is with options, which the option is very similar to the binding LOI. So I know we're low on time, so we're gonna skip past that. And then the other way to do it is you negotiate the lease, you negotiate the purchase and sale agreement, but it's contingent. It's contingent upon you getting the license. So any point in time up until you get that license, you could terminate the deal. But now comes the key question of timing. How much time do you give yourself? We don't know what the timetable is on the application process. What do you do? And especially if you're gonna be a smaller mom and pop operator, you have to do this dance where you have to prolong the negotiations a little bit. Maybe not sign right away, but keep that conversation going. Give yourself flexibility. Put language in there that says, listen, if I'm diligently going after this and I'm just waiting to get my license, give me another option to extend. And then this comes to the next, nothing is free in this world. And for a property owner to lock up their property for you for an extended period of time, it'll cost you. How much? Depends on the property. Is this a sexy Fifth Avenue storefront, or is this something a little more off the beaten path? Well, if it is, sometimes property owners are asking for just cover my carrying costs, okay? Or if it's a much more attractive property, they might want you to pay a percentage of what your rent might be if you move forward on the lease. So it's important to think about that, and it's also important to think about how you're gonna give the money. Don't give an upfront payment that gives you 6 months of an option. What if your license gets rejected in 2 months? Well, now you've just wasted 4 months of rent or carrying costs that you could have kept in your pocket to get ready to reapply, or you could have used for something else. Make sure the way you structure the payments are you will pay on a monthly basis, and you could terminate at any time, keep the rest of the money in your pocket. Don't go for the upfront payments. Now, I know we're running behind, but I'm gonna keep going through this. So, listen, leasing and acquiring property is another different ballgame. If you're acquiring property, the negotiations are probably not gonna be as intense from a legal standpoint. You're more talking about dollars, right? When it comes to the leasing, that's where things get much more complicated. And I'll tell you why. You're dealing with the insecurity of the property owner, their bank, and their insurance company. And what they're trying to do is put as much language in that lease so that they can terminate it if they get spooked by anything. And the problem with that is if you're in the cultivation or the manufacturing space and you've made a significant investment in that property, you can't give them a termination right. The reason they're concerned is there's this thing in the Controlled Substances Act called civil asset forfeiture. What it really means is that the Department of Justice can come in and not only seize the plants and any money that's used in connection with federally illegal activity, but they could seize the real property. What does that mean for the property owner? He doesn't want to lose his property, or the bank whose loan is secured by that property. So what they're going to say is, well, and everyone in this room knows this is probably not going to happen, but well, what if the Department of Justice comes in and they threaten to take this property back? I want to be able to terminate your lease. And you say, no, I'm not going to let you do that. But what I'll do is I'll agree to step in and defend it. I'll agree to fight, okay? Why? Because it's going to cost you a lot more if they're able to terminate your lease, your operations are completely disrupted, you got to figure out how to get all of your equipment and all your products out of the space and get out. You can't afford to do something like that. Another item I just forgot to mention, but I do want to say it's important. The key is, it's not a threatened action, it's an action. It's not if the DOJ sends a letter or they get spooked. They have to start an action to seize the real property. There are also financing issues. Listen, you've hit the lottery if you found a property owner who doesn't have a loan on the property because you don't have to deal with these. But a lot of the loan documents provide that in the event the property is used for illegal activity, that the lender can accelerate the loan. So you also need to draft to offset that. Now, I know I'm running out of time here. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to briefly touch on it. Insurance is an issue, right? An insurance company can deny a claim if the property burns down because they're going to say, well, it was used for federally illegal activity. I'm sorry, we're not going to pay to rebuild it. And what they're going to want is the ability to terminate your lease. They're going to want the ability to come after you, but you can offset it. There's ways you can offset it with a security deposit. You can agree to indemnify them. You can agree to carry insurance that would backstop it in the event that their insurance company denies it. So all of these little fixes have to get built into that lease. I'm out of time and I got to stop, but if you have any questions, come find me. I'm happy to answer all your questions, and my contact information is here. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for on the Revel too.